There can be a big learning curve with house sitting and pet sitting, so I recommend easing yourself into it. This is what I did. It may seem very simple and straightforward to house sit and pet sit for somebody, but there really are a lot of nuances to it. I recommend doing something local and short term for your first few house sits before you go and do something big, before you go abroad and solo, before you go plan multiple house sits back to back. It can be a lot to take in and a lot of variables to try to account for if everything is new, if you're in a new location, if you're on a long-term trip, if you're navigating public transportation and there's a tight timeline and you're trying to figure out this whole house sitting, pet sitting thing and keep track of all the details. Learn as much as you can about the house sitting before you go and do something more complicated, and it will make your life easier. With some experience, you'll learn how to pick really good house sits, how to communicate with the homeowners, and also to gain some confidence in your own experience. And this also helps you get more reviews. And then you go into that situation where you really, really want these house sits. Maybe there's only so many options and you need it to line up and you really need to get this one. It's gonna help you get those house sits. You'll also learn more about what you need for arriving and settling in and leaving. So for me, I can't do any bookkeeping. I can't do anything really productive that first day because there's too much on my mind, and it's hard for me to focus into bookkeeping when I'm trying to take in all this new information. When I leave, I have to give myself a certain amount of time that I'm comfortable with for cleaning up and getting everything ready and packing and all of that. Everybody will be different, and you finding out what you need for that is going to come with experience. You'll also figure out what questions you need to ask and things you need to get clear on. So different situations call for different details. I've done a house sit where it was just some cats in the city and it wasn't a big deal. And then when I went out and did a house sit that was out in the country and there was multiple dogs and they all had like GPS tracking devices on and they were off lead, and I wasn't totally clear on like the boundaries of the property. There was questions that I realized that I didn't even think to ask in that situation. Like, what are their cues? Like, do they have good recall? Like, what is the thing that you do if they do this? And so it didn't occur to me until I got there and I was like, oh yeah, this is a totally different situation. My normal set of questions didn't really cover all the details of this. And it's totally fine to reach out and get more clarification and ask them questions. The homeowner is usually always available. They want to make sure that if you have any questions, they can answer it because they want it to be done correctly and they want everything to go smoothly as well. You'll also notice how every homeowner is very different. Some of them are very nervous about having a stranger come into their home, and then other homeowners are warm and welcoming and very laid back and so appreciative that you're there and very generous. And there's something about really getting used to taking on that kind of responsibility. Even though I've had responsibility for animals for a very long time in my life, it's different when it's somebody else's animals and they're gone. Like, they might be really far away. Letting yourself get comfortable with that too is something that might take time. So this is what I did. I started off in Bonnie Lake as my first house sit. I was based in Seattle and I wanted to go hiking at Mount Rainier, and I wanted to be somewhere a bit closer so that I didn't have to drive as much. So I found a house sit in Bonnie Lake. That was the closest one. And it was great. It was just some cats. I was able to leave and be gone all day, and it was a good situation. It worked out, and she was nice enough to accept my application, even though I only had the one reference because I hadn't had any reviews yet from people on the website. And she took a chance on me. Luckily, she was very happy when she came home, and yeah, she gave me a good review, and then it was just easier to get house sits after that. So the one I did after that was in Sammamish, which I think it was like an hour away. And yeah, another easy situation, just one dog, just walking and feeding basically, and not a big deal. So once I did that, I got a wild hair and I decided to do a whole road trip doing house sits in the US still. So I hadn't left the country yet. And I went through Washington and then I drove, and my next house sit was in Salt Lake City. And then I drove down through Utah and up through California, or through Vegas and up through California, and then up through Oregon. And so I did, I think 4 or 5 different house sits through that road trip. And all told, it was like 25 days. And at one point I met a friend. So it wasn't all house sitting, but the majority of it was house sitting. So I did tons of hiking. That was the main point. I learned so much from doing that. And that was definitely out of my comfort zone. After doing like 5 or 6 house sits, I felt so confident. I felt like I had learned so much. I was making notes like, oh, these are the things that I would tell somebody if they were just starting house sitting. And I'm so glad that I did it. When I moved to Switzerland, I have to leave and come back for the 90-day rule for the Schengen region. And so my boyfriend went with me to England for a month and we did house sitting together. So that was my first time house sitting abroad. Everybody was nicer than in the US, like more welcoming and warm, and also more situations where I arrived the night before and met them and we went over details in person. So that was very different. And I like that a lot better. I was like still getting used to the public transportation system. So there was like a lot of learning curve in terms of travel that I was going through when I was in Switzerland and England. And so by the time I was house sitting in England, I was really glad that my boyfriend was there because it just would have been such a big learning curve in both of those areas. And I think it would have been too much. Then we went back to Switzerland and now I'm house sitting again for 2 months in England. And I'm doing it by myself, with the exception of there's like a 3-day house sit that my boyfriend will be joining me for. I feel so much more comfortable doing it myself now, having had all of those house sitting experiences and even coming back to some of these places that I already have been to before when I was here in June. I already had the experience of like lining up all these house sits back to back. I know not everybody has the luxury of having somebody with them when they go abroad and they're starting to do the house sitting. So I can be your friend that shares the information. Maybe you can not have to learn it the hard way. I hope that helped. And if you have any questions, put them in the comments. I will be back with more videos. See you next time.